Good evening, and welcome to Twilight Tale, where history whispers and sleep comes gently. Tonight's sleeping history story begins in a world of marble streets and salty sea air in a city that glittered beneath the Mediterranean sun, ancient Athens. But this is not a tale of monsters or heroes with swords. This is a story about something quieter and far more powerful. A question: who should decide the future of a city? For a long time, the answer was simple: the wealthy, the noble, the few. But change has a way of arriving like dawn, slow at first, then all at once. So get comfortable. Let your shoulders soften and allow your breathing to slow. As the lamps dim in your room, we'll walk through moonlit alleys of the past and listen to the voices of ordinary Athenians, farmers, potters, sailors, who lived through a turning point that would echo across centuries. This is how the ancient Greeks invented democracy, a bedtime story of change. Now, let's begin. It is said that there is an hour before dawn when cities remember who they were before names were given to them. In Athens, that hour arrives softly. The sky is still marked by the moon, pale and thinning, like a breath held too long. Stone streets lie cool and untouched, their surfaces smoothed by centuries of passing feet now resting. Columns stand in quiet rows, their shadows stretched thin across the ground, as if reluctant to let the night go. The hills surrounding the city fold inward, holding their silence like hands pressed together in prayer. No voice rises yet, no bell calls the day forward, only stone. And beneath the silence, a question drifts gently through the air, barely more than a thought. Can stone remember the voices that once shaped it? Before democracy had a name, before it became an idea carried across centuries, this land already listened. It listened to footsteps of kings and farmers, to whispers of lineage spoken behind closed doors, to decrees carved into tablets that few could touch. Power moved quietly then, flowing through bloodlines like inherited breath. Rule belonged to families whose names were heavier than law, whose shadows lengthened at sunset and reached into every corner of the city. Athens slept beneath them all, unaware that sleep itself was becoming a kind of waiting. Whispers tell us that change does not arrive like thunder. It arrives like dust shifting between stones. As the pale light grows, the city begins to stir, not with movement, but with awareness. Courtyards hold echoes from nights before. Olive trees rustle gently, their leaves brushing against one another as if exchanging secrets too old to remember clearly. Wells reflect the fading stars, their dark water unbroken, carrying the sky downward into the earth. The people of Athens are awake now, though many still lie in their homes. They are not yet a people, not in the way memory will later shape them. They are scattered breaths, lives separated by walls, by names, by the quiet weight of belonging to someone else's order. Law exists, but it feels distant. It is spoken from high places, hills, halls, ancestral chambers, etched into stone with careful hands. The letters are precise, enduring, and cold. They do not bend. They do not listen. They are meant to be obeyed, not answered. And yet, beneath the silence, something begins to stir. It is not rebellion, not yet. It is a feeling, soft, unformed, almost dangerous in its gentleness, a sense that suffering shared might mean something, that hunger endured together carries a different weight than hunger borne alone, that voices, even quiet ones, might leave marks not only on air but on stone itself. Beneath the dust of the streets, beneath the sandals and the passing shadows, the ground remembers older rhythms. Long before councils or crowns, this land heard gatherings, circles around fires, shared meals beneath stars, songs rising without permission. Memory lingers in the soil, faint but persistent, like a pulse felt only when one kneels close enough to the earth. Marked by the moon, the city holds this memory without naming it. Myth and memory blur here, as they often do at beginnings. Some speak of ancestral curses, others of divine balance disturbed. Some believe the gods themselves lean closer, curious. Others feel only exhaustion, the quiet weariness of a city held too tightly by too few. What loosens first is not power, but silence. A murmur travels through the agora before the stalls are raised. A shared glance lingers a moment longer than before. Words are tested, spoken softly, then withdrawn. Breath gathers, courage rehearses itself in the chest, unsure whether it will ever be needed. No hero rises from the crowd. No voice declares a new order. Change in Athens moves like water beneath stone, unseen, patient, reshaping everything by staying. It is said that stone listens best when it has been worn smooth. Athens had been worn smooth by time, by hardship, by the quiet accumulation of unequal weight. Deaths pressed families into silence. Land narrowed into fewer hands. The old bloodlines tightened their grip, believing permanence was proof of divine favor. But permanence is an illusion stone understands well. Columns crumble not because they are weak, but because they endure. As dawn approaches, light touches the Acropolis first. The temples glow faintly, their surfaces catching gold and copper tones, as if breathing warmth back into the cold air. These stones have witnessed offerings and oaths, victories and losses. They have absorbed voices raised in praise and fear alike. Now something different approaches them, not noise, attention. The city begins, without realizing it, to listen to itself. Shared suffering becomes a quiet bond. Stories repeat, passed hand to hand like fragile vessels. A man speaks of injustice, another recognizes it as his own. A woman listens from behind a wall, holding words she is not yet allowed to release. Enslaved hands work the stone, their labor unseen, their presence uncounted, yet their touch shaping the city's body. Democracy is not born cleanly here. It is not pure, not whole. It is a tremor, a shift beneath the foot that makes one pause, uncertain whether the ground is steady or alive. The gates of silence do not fall, they loosen. Dust slips through the cracks. Light follows. Somewhere between myth and memory, the idea forms, not fully spoken, not yet named, that rule might one day belong not to blood, but to breath. that a city could be shaped by listening rather than command. Stone, patient and ancient, receives this idea without judgment. Where memory fades, stone remains. Athens does not record this moment clearly. No single tablet marks it. No date survives untouched. Instead, the shift lives in absences, in the way later generations will speak of before and after, without agreeing where one ended and the other began. The city inhales. Nothing outward changes. The same families hold influence. The same laws remain carved and cold. The same exclusions persist, unseen by those who benefit from them. And yet something irreversible has begun. The land itself seems to lean closer. Walls echo differently now, carrying murmurs farther than before. Open spaces invite gathering. Hills no longer feel like thrones, but like stages awaiting voices. Stone, once a surface for command, begins to feel like a witness. It is said that some truths arrive not to be declared, but to be endured. Athens endures this one quietly. As dawn finally breaks, the city exhales. Birds call softly from rooftops. The first footsteps cross the streets, stirring dust into pale spirals. The moon retreats, leaving behind a sky washed in early blue. Nothing has changed, and yet everything has. The stones do not speak, they never will, but they have listened. They have felt the weight of voices pressing upward, asking, not demanding, to be heard. Perhaps this awakening was destiny. Perhaps it was accident. Perhaps it was simply the patience of time finally opening its eyes. Beneath the silence, the city holds its breath, unaware that it has already begun a story that will echo far beyond its hills, long after its stones have returned to dust. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and now Athens listens to itself, to the earth beneath it, and to the quiet future waiting just beyond the light. It is said that the night remembers what daylight forgets. Beneath a sky washed in dusk blue and softened ash, a single scroll loosens itself from a stone table. The parchment trembles in the open air, not from fear, but from breath, the slow breathing of a city resting uneasily within its own bones. Ink, still dark and wet, gleams like something newly spoken, something not yet hardened into certainty. The words do not command, they hover, they wait. Around the scroll, Athens sleeps. Marble streets cool beneath the moon. Columns stand like ancient witnesses, holding their silence with practiced devotion. Beyond the walls, the sea exhales, wave after wave, repeating a lesson older than kings, that all things move and nothing stays. And in this fragile moment, between writing and consequence, a question rises, barely louder than dust settling on stone. What kind of power chooses to leave once it has spoken? The scroll lifts again in the breeze, answering only with motion, as if it already knows what the city has yet to learn. Whispers tell us that Solon never desired the weight of crowns. He was not shaped by conquest or ornamented with certainty. He came instead as a poet, a listener, a man attentive to imbalance. Athens in his time was a body struggling to breathe, lungs tight with debt, veins narrowed by obligation. The poor bent beneath invisible chains, the wealthy mistook height for permanence and silence for consent. Solon stood between them, not as thunder, but as pause. He watched the city the way one watches fire, aware that warmth and destruction rise from the same source. His reforms arrived quietly, no procession, no spectacle. They came like careful breaths, measured and deliberate, meant to slow a city rushing toward fracture. Debts were lifted from shoulders already bowed by years of shame. Bodies were freed from ownership, returned to themselves. But beneath the silence, something heavier remained. For while chains can be broken, habits endure. Hearts trained to kneel or command do not forget so easily. Solon knew this. The knowledge settled into him like dust in an abandoned sanctuary, unseen but everywhere. Where memory fades, stone remembers. In markets and alleyways, gratitude mingled with resentment. Some praised balance, others mourned what restraint had taken from them. The laws pleased no one entirely, and in that displeasure lived their fragile truth. They were not perfect, they were human. Marked by the moon, Solon's laws reflected cycles rather than endings. They were meant to bend, not dominate, to guide, not grip. He carved them not as eternal verdicts, but as agreements with time itself, trusting that future hands would read them differently, perhaps even misunderstand them, but never forget them entirely. Still, the city leaned toward him. Power gathered like a tide at his feet, asking him to remain, to oversee, to correct, to rule. Authority offered itself softly at first, then with insistence. But Solon had already seen the danger. Power bound too tightly to a living body begins to decay with it. Laws watched over by their maker never learn how to stand alone. So he chose absence. It is said, quietly, almost reverently, that Solon exiled himself not from despair, but from devotion. He understood that if Athens was to learn balance, it could not rely on his presence as a stabilizing weight. The city needed to breathe without him. Leadership, in his vision, dissolved into silence. And so he walked away, not in anger, not in triumph, but with the calm finality of a candle being covered, not extinguished. His footsteps faded along the road beyond the walls. Dust rose, then settled. The city was left alone with its reflection, no interpreter, no living shield, only words etched into stone, exposed to weather, to choice, to time. Beneath the silence, a sacred paradox unfolded. Trust was placed not in a man, but in duration, not in command, but in patience. The road curved gently, as if reluctant to release him. Footprints softened, then disappeared. The poet-lawgiver became smaller with each step, until he was no longer a figure, but a memory. Then, not even that. Athens remained, unfinished, uneasy, alive. Columns still stood, markets still murmured. Arguments flickered like torches in the dark. Democracy, in its earliest breath, arrived not as certainty, but as an open question left deliberately unanswered. Perhaps it was never meant to be resolved. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and somewhere beneath an open sky, the lawgiver who walked away dissolved into the silence he trusted, leaving behind not control, but the courage to let go. It is said that fire remembers faces. Torchlight moves slowly across the walls, and with each flicker, stone eyes awaken. Ancestral masks line the chamber, carved faces of old families, noble bloodlines pressed into permanence. Their expressions are calm, assured, unchanging. They have watched generations arrive and fade. They have listened to vows whispered at birth and promises sealed in marriage. They are accustomed to endurance. The air is heavy with smoke and dust. Shadows gather in the hollows of the masks, deepening their gaze. Beneath the silence, something stirs. Not rebellion, not celebration, but a tremor of doubt. How does a city loosen the grip of inherited power without tearing itself apart? The question does not demand an answer. It lingers, like heat held in stone, long after the fire dims. Whispers tell us that Athens once believed blood was destiny, that a name carried weight long before a voice ever learned to speak. Lineage was map and boundary, blessing and burden. To belong was to be claimed by the past, claimed before choice could form. And yet, beneath the silence of those watching masks, the city had begun to feel crowded by its own history. Cleisthenes does not arrive as a conqueror in this story. There is no thunder in his steps, no sharp blade cutting through tradition. His work is quieter than that, a patient unthreading, a careful loosening of knots tied so long ago that many had forgotten they were bound at all. Democracy in this moment is not a song of triumph. It is a ritual of unweaving. Old tribal loyalties, once sacred and unquestioned, are touched gently, as one touches a wound that has healed incorrectly. To tear them away would be violence. To leave them untouched would be suffocation. And so Cleisthenes does something subtle. He redraws the shape of belonging. The land itself becomes the guide. Demes emerge, local places, shared ground, neighborhoods shaped by proximity rather than pedigree. Regions replace clans, neighbors replace ancestors. Identity begins to shift, slowly, like a constellation rearranging itself in the night sky. Borders are drawn in sand, then smoothed away. Lines appear, dissolve, and appear again. They are not walls, but breaths, tentative, reversible. Marked by the moon, these new divisions glow softly, as if asking permission to exist. Names are spoken differently now, tested, rolled carefully on the tongue. Some sound unfamiliar, even to those who carry them. Where memory fades, something new tries to form, uncertain of its own weight. This is not an easy transformation. Beneath the silence, fear settles into homes and courtyards. People wake unsure of who they are without the shadows of their fathers and grandfathers stretching ahead of them. To lose inherited identity is to stand briefly unguarded, exposed to possibility. Myth drifts close in these moments. Old stories of exile surface. Heroes cast out, wandering until they are remade. Return is never simple in such tales. One never comes back unchanged. Reinvention, the myths remind us, is always a kind of loss. The ancestral masks still hang on the walls, but dust gathers along their edges now. Their authority softens, not through destruction, but neglect. Silence does what force cannot. The faces watch, but fewer people look back. It is said that some nights the city itself seemed unsure of its outline. Streets felt unfamiliar. Voices echoed strangely, as if spoken in a room newly built. The past had not vanished, it hovered, but it no longer dictated every step. Cleisthenes trusts this hovering. He does not rush the forgetting. He understands that a city must mourn what it sheds, even if what it shed once held it captive. Democracy here is not the erasure of history, but its loosening, a hand opening after holding too tightly for too long. Beneath starlight, strangers begin to stand together, not united by blood, but by shared uncertainty. They look upward at the same sky, breathe the same night air, listen to the same distant sea. None of this guarantees harmony, none of it promises peace, but it offers something quieter and perhaps more enduring, the courage to step into the unknown, together. The old masks remain, but they no longer define the room. Dust dulls their gaze. Time reclaims them gently. Somewhere between fear and hope, a new way of belonging takes its first unsteady breath. Perhaps it was never meant to feel complete. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and beneath a sky scattered with stars, marked by silence rather than certainty, democracy is born not from unity, but from shared risk, a city learning, slowly, how to become unfamiliar to itself. It is said that some places remember sound long after voices have gone. The Nynx Hill lies open beneath the moon, bare and waiting. Stone curves gently toward a hollowed center, as if the earth itself once leaned inward to listen. No torches burn now, no figures stand. Only tall grass moves in the night wind, bowing and lifting again, rehearsing speeches that have long since dissolved into air. The moon washes the hill in pale silver, shadows soften, edges blur. Beneath the silence, something lingers, a pressure, a held breath, as though the ground expects words to return. And then the question arrives, not spoken aloud, but felt. What happens when voices meet without a throne between them? The hill does not answer. It never has. It only makes space. Whispers tell us that the assembly was never meant to be a monument. It was not built to dazzle the eye or command obedience. It was shaped as a circle, wide, exposed, unfinished, a place where no one could hide entirely and no one could tower without effort. Here, democracy did not announce itself with banners or proclamations. It gathered quietly, like dew at dawn. Citizens came not to kneel or to be addressed, but to stand within the same sun, the same wind, the same listening. The ground made no distinction between sandals worn by wealth and those worn thin by labor. The sky offered no hierarchy. All were equally small beneath it. Yet the silence before the first voice was heavy. Beneath the silence, hesitation moved like a tide pulling back from shore. To speak here was to step forward without armor. Words had no guarantee of landing safely. Some would be ignored. Some would fall awkwardly. Some would vanish before reaching the edge of the circle. And still, voices rose. Not all at once, not with confidence, one at a time, slowly, imperfectly. A throat clearing, a breath drawn too sharply, a sentence begun, then reshaped mid-air. The act itself carried weight, not because of eloquence, but because it was offered to the open. The assembly was less a debate than a ritual of exposure. Pauses mattered more than arguments. The space between words grew thick with attention, breath before sound, murmur after. Even disagreement moved softly, careful not to fracture the fragile listening that held the circle together. It is said that some places remember sound long after voices have gone. Phoenix Hill lies open beneath the moon, bare and waiting. Stone curves gently toward a hollowed center, as if the earth itself once leaned inward to listen. No torches burn now, no figures stand, only tall grass moves in the night wind, bowing and lifting again, rehearsing speeches that have long since dissolved into air. The moon washes the hill in pale silver, shadows soften, edges blur. Beneath the silence, something lingers, a pressure, a held breath, as though the ground expects words to return. And then the question arrives, not spoken aloud, but felt. What happens when voices meet without a throne between them? The hill does not answer. It never has. It only makes space. Whispers tell us that the assembly was never meant to be a monument. It was not built to dazzle the eye or command obedience. It was shaped as a circle, wide, exposed, unfinished, a place where no one could hide entirely and no one could tower without effort. Here, democracy did not announce itself with banners or proclamations. It gathered quietly, like dew at dawn. Citizens came not to kneel or to be addressed, but to stand within the same sun, the same wind, the same listening. The ground made no distinction between sandals worn by wealth and those worn thin by labor. The sky offered no hierarchy. All were equally small beneath it. Yet the silence before the first voice was heavy. Beneath the silence, hesitation moved like a tide pulling back from shore. To speak here was to step forward without armor. Words had no guarantee of landing safely. Some would be ignored, some would fall awkwardly, some would vanish before reaching the edge of the circle. And still voices rose, not all at once, not with confidence, one at a time, slowly, imperfectly, a throat clearing, a breath drawn too sharply, a sentence begun, then reshaped mid-air. The act itself carried weight, not because of eloquence, but because it was offered to the open. The assembly was less a debate than a ritual of exposure. Pauses mattered more than arguments. The space between words grew thick with attention, breath before sound, murmur after. Even disagreement moved softly, careful not to fracture the fragile listening that held the circle together. Democracy here felt like a flame cupped in open hands, alive, warming, and always at risk. It is said that no voice truly ruled this place, not even the loudest, not even the most practiced. Authority dissolved into proximity, To speak was not to command, but to reveal oneself briefly, then step back into the shared air. Yet the contradiction lay plainly in the open. Not all voices were allowed to rise. The circle was wide, but not complete. Women, slaves, foreigners, their words hovered outside the hill, unheard, though not unfelt. Democracy was being born with its eyes half open, its ears still learning the shape of inclusion. Beneath the silence, this absence echoed too. Still, something irreversible had begun. The idea of collective voice, once released, does not easily return to confinement. Even those who could not speak were changed by the knowledge that speech itself had shifted from throne to ground, from lineage to presence. Time passed differently on Pnyx Hill. Hours did not march forward, they pooled and thinned. The sun traced its slow arc, shadows rotated, words were offered, then absorbed by the earth. Some sank deep, others evaporated almost at once. What mattered was not the decision reached, but the listening endured. Where memory fades, the hill remembers posture, bodies angled inward, eyes level, hands empty, no crowns, no scepters, only the shared vulnerability of being seen and heard, however briefly. Marked by the moon, the assembly carried a rhythm older than law, a rhythm of call and response, of silence answering sound. It echoed something oceanic, waves advancing, retreating, never claiming final ground. As dusk approached, voices thinned, the circle loosened, people drifted away in small currents, carrying fragments of speech like embers. No announcement marked the end, no final word sealed the gathering. The hill returned to itself. Grass lifted again in the evening wind, stone cooled, shadows lengthened and merged, silence settled, not empty, but layered. Beneath the silence, echoes remained, not echoes of decisions, but of possibility, the knowledge that listening had once occurred here, openly, imperfectly, and could occur again. Perhaps it was never meant to be permanent. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as the moon climbed higher, Pnyx Hill rested, holding the memory of a circle where voices once gathered and where silence learned how to listen back. It is said that the smallest fragments carry the heaviest weight. In the quiet before dawn, a single shard of clay rests in a palm. It is warm from the body that holds it, rough along its broken edge. Scratched into its surface is a name, uneven, hurried, yet deliberate. The letters catch the light like scars. This fragment was once part of a vessel meant to hold grain, oil, or water. Now it holds something less tangible, yet far more fragile. Fear. The hand does not tremble. It pauses. Breath slows. Around it, the city waits, wrapped in that peculiar stillness that comes before a choice becomes irreversible. And a question settles into the air, calm but unsettling. Can exile be an act of protection rather than cruelty? Beneath the silence, Athens listens to itself. Whispers tell us that democracy did not only learn how to include, it also learned how to push away, not with swords or shouting, but with pottery, broken, ordinary, earth-born things that could be held, written upon, and released. Ostracism was not punishment in the way later ages would understand it. There were no trials soaked in accusation, no blood demanded in exchange for peace. Instead, there was caution, memory, the long shadow of tyranny that had once stretched across the city, teaching its lesson too well. Fear here was not sudden, it was inherited. The people remembered how power could harden, how a single voice could grow too loud, too permanent. They remembered how easily gratitude turned into obedience and obedience into silence. Beneath the silence of the present moment, the past breathed softly, reminding them not to forget. Each shard of clay became a confession. Names were scratched not always with certainty, but with unease. Some letters were firm, others wavered. Each fragment carried a different reason, a rumor overheard, a pattern noticed, a gut feeling that something someday might tilt too far. No one spoke these reasons aloud. The ritual did not ask for explanation, only participation. Where memory fades, the earth remembers touch. The shards passed from hand to hand, collecting warmth, hesitation, resolve. They fell into urns like soft rain, muted, unceremonious, almost tender. There was no roar of approval, no condemnation shouted across stone, only the sound of clay meeting clay. Beneath the silence, moral ambiguity settled like dust. Was this wisdom learned through pain, or fear disguised as foresight? The ritual offered no answer. It asked only that the city choose together and bear the weight together. Myth drifts close to practices like this. Old stories speak of the scapegoat, the chosen absence onto which disorder is placed, then sent beyond the walls. The belief that harmony can be restored if imbalance is given a direction, a path leading away. Marked by the moon, ostracism carried this ancient logic quietly within it. Not death, but distance. Not erasure, but removal. A decade of absence, enough time for tensions to cool, for names to lose their sharpness. And yet, absence leaves its own echo. The one whose name filled the most shards would not be shamed in the square. There would be no public reckoning, only a road leading outward and time waiting at its far end. The city would remain intact, that was the hope. But beneath the silence, another truth lingered. The city was protecting itself not only from potential tyranny, but from its own fear of repetition. Democracy, still young, still fragile, wrapped itself in caution the way one wraps a wound, tightly, perhaps too tightly, unsure whether pressure heals or harms. The ritual ended without spectacle. Urns were sealed, shards lay hidden, their messages buried together. The hand that had held the clay was now empty, dust clinging faintly to the skin. The city exhaled, though it did not yet know whether the breath was relief or regret. As the sun climbed higher, Athens resumed its rhythm. Markets opened, voices returned, life continued, almost convincingly. But somewhere a decision had been made. At the edge of the city, a road stretched outward, pale with dust. It did not announce who would walk it. It did not need to. The road had learned long ago that names fade faster than footsteps. Beneath the silence, the dust settled. No figure is named, no farewell is witnessed, only the knowledge that someone will leave so that others may remain, and that this exchange, quiet, uneasy, lies at the heart of self-rule. Perhaps it was never meant to feel just. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as night returns, the shards sleep beneath the earth, holding their scratched confessions close, while democracy rests, uncertain whether it has protected itself through wisdom or through fear, and whether the line between the two was ever clear. It is said that chance has its own music. It begins softly, almost unnoticed, a quiet clatter beneath the stars. Smooth stones shift within a clay vessel, touching, separating, touching again. The sound is neither harsh nor dramatic. It resembles rain brushing against pottery, or shells turning in a shallow tide. Above, the night sky stretches wide and patient, marked by the moon and scattered stars that have watched far more than they have ever judged. No name is spoken yet, no hand is raised in triumph, only the vessel waits, heavy with possibility. And into this stillness drifts a question, gentle as breath. What if power were entrusted to chance rather than ambition? The question does not demand belief, it invites wonder. Whispers tell us that Athens once placed its trust not in those who reached upward, but in the unseen currents that move beneath all things. Sortition, the drawing of lots, was not treated as randomness alone, but as a sacred veil. Through it, equality revealed itself briefly, imperfectly, like a constellation glimpsed through cloud. Here, no one prepared for power. There were no rehearsed speeches, no cultivated voices, no hunger sharpened by competition. The city did not ask who wanted to rule, it asked instead who would be chosen, not by desire, but by fate's quiet hand. The stones bore no hierarchy, each was shaped by time, smoothed by water and handling, equal in weight, equal in silence. When they were drawn, it was not victory that followed, but stillness, the pause where a life adjusts its breath. Beneath the silence, humility entered the room. To be chosen was not to ascend, but to accept. Leadership arrived like weather, not like conquest, temporary, uncertain, passing through rather than taking hold. The office would be held for a season, then released, returning both role and person to the shared ground of the city. Marked by the moon, this surrender to chance carried a deep wisdom. Ambition narrows vision, desire clings, but fate, unseen, indifferent, opens space where fairness can briefly breathe. Yet uncertainty shadowed every draw. What if the chosen were unready? What if chance erred? These doubts did not disappear. They were acknowledged quietly, like cracks in stone that no one pretends are not there. Democracy did not claim perfection. It practiced trust instead. Beneath the silence, breath became the measure. Each role lasted only as long as breath could be counted in seasons. Time itself stood guard against tyranny. No one lingered long enough to harden. No one ruled long enough to forget the feeling of being ordinary. Power here was not possessed, it was borrowed. Where memory fades, ritual remembers. The drawing of stones was repeated again and again, not as spectacle, but as rhythm, a city breathing in chance, breathing out control. Over time, the act itself became sacred, not because it guaranteed wisdom, but because it restrained desire. Stars wheeled overhead, indifferent yet constant. The ocean murmured beyond the walls, reminding all who listened that currents shape more than will ever could. And when the season ended, the stones returned to their vessel. There was no ceremony of farewell, no monument raised. The clay container closed its mouth, holding silence once more. The roles dissolved. Authority softened and vanished back into the many. The city exhaled. Beneath the silence, awe remained, not loud, not triumphant, but steady, a quiet recognition that once democracy trusted fate more than hunger, breath more than ambition, and time more than desire. Perhaps it was never meant to last unchanged. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and as night deepens, the vessel rests beneath the stars, stones touching gently in the dark, waiting for the next moment when chance will be asked, once again, to speak. It is said that silence has thresholds. A doorway stands half-closed at the edge of the city. Its stone frame is worn smooth by centuries of passing bodies, yet tonight no one crosses. Light spills through the narrow opening, warm, steady, deliberate, but it does not widen, it does not beckon, it simply exists, illuminating a strip of ground while leaving the rest untouched. Dust floats in the beam, turning slowly, like stars that have forgotten the sky. And in this suspended moment, a question settles gently into the dark. Who does silence belong to? The doorway does not answer. It never has. It only divides. Whispers tell us that democracy learned early how to speak, but not how to listen to everyone. Its voice was careful, measured, ritualized. Its silences were less deliberate, yet far more enduring. They stretched into rooms where decisions were never made, into lives where words were never asked for. Beneath the silence, absence gathered its own gravity. Women moved through the city like quiet currents. They knew the rhythms of dawn and dusk, the weight of water carried, the patience of bread rising. Their hands shaped the hours, but their voices did not shape the laws. In kitchens dim with smoke and warmth, words were spoken freely, stories, warnings, laughter, yet none of these crossed the threshold into the circle of power. Not because they lacked meaning, but because the doorway had already decided. Enslaved people moved through courtyards and workshops, their labor woven into every stone and vessel. They heard the debates echo faintly from afar, distorted by distance and walls. The city depended on their breath, their strength, their time, yet never their consent. Their silence was not chosen, it was assigned. Foreigners, too, lived in the margins of belonging. Traders, artisans, thinkers from distant shores. They brought ideas across the sea, star-marked and oceanic, carrying knowledge like contraband tucked into memory.
Yet when voices gathered, theirs remained outside, lingering in the dust beyond the door.
Where memory fades, these lives persist, not in inscriptions, but in traces. Footsteps worn into stone floors, ash settled into hearths, tools smoothed by repeated use. The city truly lived in these places: kitchens, workshops, shadowed courtyards, spaces rich with sound, movement, and quiet intelligence. And yet democracy did not look there. Beneath the silence, the contradiction rested quietly, a system built on voice, sustained by silence, a sacred circle drawn with care, leaving its edges deliberately unfinished. The tone of this absence is not accusation, it is mourning, not for what might have been achieved, but for what was never asked. It is said that the city believed itself whole because it could not hear what it excluded. Silence, after all, does not argue, it does not demand, it simply endures, patient and unseen. At night, these unseen lives gathered beneath the same sky. Stars did not distinguish between those invited and those barred. The moon marked all equally. Breath rose and fell across thresholds without permission. In these shared hours, something like equality existed, fragile, fleeting, unacknowledged. Myth lingers close here. Ancient stories speak of veiled figures, of voices carried by wind rather than mouths, of truths that wait in shadow until time learns how to receive them. Perhaps these silences were never empty. Perhaps they were only waiting. The doorway remains half closed. Light still spills through, unchanged. Inside, voices continue their careful rituals. Outside, life continues its deeper rhythms, grinding grain, shaping clay, raising children, surviving storms. Democracy speaks loudly of itself, while the city hums quietly beyond its hearing. Marked by the moon, the silence does not disappear. It settles into walls, into habits, into the shape of history itself. And so the chapter does not end. The doorway remains, the light remains, the division remains. Perhaps it was never meant to be resolved in its beginning. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and as sleep approaches, the listener is left holding the weight of what democracy was and what it was not, a sacred beginning shaped as much by exclusion as by voice, resting quietly beneath an open sky that heard everyone even when the city did not. It is said that twilight is the hour when questions grow heavier than answers. The sky dims slowly above Athens, not with urgency, but with deliberation. Stone streets cool beneath the fading sun. Shadows lengthen, stretching like unfinished thoughts across the ground. A lone figure moves through this half-light, unhurried, his pace guided not by destination, but by reflection. Each step seems to carry a question rather than a conclusion. The city exhales around him, voices soften, the day loosens its grip. And into this gentle uncertainty, a question drifts, barely louder than breath. Can wisdom survive the many? The question does not accuse, it wonders. Whispers tell us that Socrates did not mistrust people, only certainty. He did not stand against the city, he leaned into it, listening for the spaces where confidence became brittle. His doubt was not rejection, but care, a careful hand placed against the pulse of democracy, feeling for irregular rhythms. Beneath the silence, his questions moved like water against stone. He walked among crowds that believed in their own clarity. Markets buzzed with opinion, assemblies swelled with voices rising together, warm with conviction. Decisions were shaped in daylight, visible and shared. This, too, was sacred, a city daring to speak with itself. And yet, Socrates lingered at the edges of agreement. He asked not to dismantle, but to soften, not to silence, but to slow. Each question was a small erosion of certainty, a reminder that knowing how little one knows is its own form of wisdom. The crowd was not his enemy, it was human. Beneath the silence of his pauses, contradiction rested gently. Democracy needed voices, many of them, to breathe. But wisdom, he sensed, often arrived quietly, unsure of itself, reluctant to shout. Truth did not always rise in chorus. Sometimes it whispered from corners no one lingered in for long. Socratic questioning did not offer answers, it opened spaces. What is justice? What is virtue? What is knowledge? Each inquiry loosened another stone in the wall of assumption, not to collapse it, but to let light pass through the cracks. Marked by the moon, his method felt almost ritualistic, a slow circling, a return again and again to first breath. He trusted that if people could sit with not knowing, something deeper than opinion might emerge. But doubt unsettles. The city grew uneasy with mirrors held too steadily. Questions, once welcomed, began to feel like erosion rather than illumination. The many preferred answers that could stand upright, not those that leaned and trembled. Beneath the silence, tension gathered, not loud, not sharp, but present. Socrates did not shout back. He did not harden his stance. Even as the ground shifted beneath him, his voice remained soft, almost tender. To doubt the crowd was not to despise it. It was to fear how easily confidence could drift into ignorance when unexamined. Where memory fades, his questions remain. They were never meant to conclude. They were invitations to humility, to patience, to the courage of uncertainty. Democracy, he seemed to suggest, must learn not only how to speak, but how to pause. As night deepened, his voice thinned into the dark. The city continued, vibrant and unresolved. Assemblies gathered again. Decisions were made. Life moved forward, as it always does. And Socrates' questions faded, not erased, but absorbed into the stone, the air, the habits of thought that linger long after voices fall quiet. Perhaps it was never meant to be settled. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as sleep approaches, the listener is left within that sacred tension between truth and consensus, between wisdom and the many, where no answer waits, only the soft, enduring hush of a question still breathing. It is said that the sea remembers every sound ever given to it. Tonight, the water does not rest. Beneath the moon, waves press against one another, restless, overlapping, unable to settle into rhythm. Silver light fractures across the surface, breaking and reforming with each movement. The horizon is veiled in mist, as though the world itself has chosen not to watch too closely. The sea breathes unevenly, and from this uneasy motion, a question rises, not sharp, but weighted, like a tide pulling back before it returns. What happens when many voices move as one without pause? The sea answers only with sound, and then with silence. Whispers tell us that cities, like waters, can swell too quickly, that harmony can become force when breath is forgotten. Democracy learned this not through triumph, but through moments it wished it could soften after the fact. Athens once spoke loudly. Voices gathered, warmed by confidence and urgency. The assembly filled with sound, conviction stacking upon conviction, agreement amplifying itself until doubt had no place to land. The city believed in its own momentum. The many moved together, not with malice, but with certainty. Beneath the silence that came later, this distinction mattered. Decisions were made swiftly. War was named. Banners were lifted. The future felt graspable, almost simple. Pride moved easily when shared, when echoed back by familiar voices. The city leaned forward, convinced that unity itself was wisdom. But unity without pause does not listen. Time passed. The sound of marching replaced the sound of speaking. Stone walls watched quietly as ships departed, their hulls cutting the water with resolve. The sea accepted them without judgment, carrying their reflections until distance dissolved them into mist. Loss arrived slowly. Not all at once, not announced. It came as absence, names spoken less often, streets quieter at dusk, messages that did not return. The city learned, gently and painfully, that speaking together does not guarantee seeing clearly. Beneath the silence, regret settled like dust. Democracy did not collapse under these moments. It endured them. It learned to sit with what could not be undone. The city did not erase its choices. It carried them, heavy and instructive, allowing memory to temper pride. There were no grand confessions. No single voice stood to name the mistake. Instead, reflection seeped into the stone itself. Walls absorbed it, courtyards held it. The echo of former certainty softened with each retelling. Where memory fades, sorrow teaches. The city grew quieter after clamor, not permanently, but deliberately. Pauses lengthened, hesitation returned as something valuable, not weak. Silence reclaimed its place between words, reminding voices that breath matters. Democracy here learned restraint not from theory, but from consequence. Marked by the moon, assemblies gathered again, this time slower. The same people, the same structures, but the air had changed. Voices carried less weight of inevitability. Questions lingered longer before answers formed. Doubt was no longer chased away. The sea, too, learned to rest. Storms passed, waters calmed, reflections returned to the surface, trembling but intact. The restless tide smoothed itself into rhythm once more, as if remembering an older pattern beneath disruption. Athens did not forget when it spoke too loudly. It listened to the echoes. Perhaps it was never meant to speak perfectly. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as the night deepens, the water grows calm beneath the moon. The city rests with its memories close, knowing now that democracy's wisdom was not given at birth. It was earned slowly through learning how to hear itself after the sound had faded.
It is said that ruins are not empty. Under a star-marked sky, broken columns stand breathing cool air. Their edges are softened, their flutes chipped by centuries of wind, yet they remain upright, as if listening. Moonlight pools between fallen stones. Dust settles slowly, disturbed only by the passing of night wind, which moves through the ruins like a careful hand across old scars. Nothing speaks aloud here. And yet, beneath the silence, something waits. A question, older than memory and younger than breath, drifts gently into the dark. Do ideas sleep, or do they wait? The ruins offer no answer. They never do. They only hold the space where answers once stood. Whispers tell us that Athens did not fall all at once. It softened, it thinned, its voices scattered into corridors of time, carried away by conquest, neglect, repetition. The assembly grew quiet, the stones cooled, grass threaded itself between marble seams. Democracy, once spoken daily, became something remembered rather than practiced. Stone turned to dust, but breath did not end. Beneath the silence of abandonment, memory lingered like a low tide that never fully retreats. Scrolls were copied, miscopied, lost, rediscovered. Ideas drifted, altered, imperfect, yet alive, passing through hands that did not always know their origin. Names faded, structures crumbled, but questions endured. What is power? Who should hold it? How many voices are enough? Where memory fades, echoes remain. Centuries moved like deep water. Empires rose and hardened, then fractured under their own weight. Crowns replaced assemblies. Silence replaced speech. And still the echo traveled, not loudly, not intact, but persistently. Democracy became a whisper.
Sometimes it was misheard. Sometimes it was reshaped into something harsher, narrower, louder than it had ever been. Sometimes it slept, buried beneath urgency, fear, certainty. But even in sleep, it breathed. Marked by the moon, the echo crossed borders without permission. It slipped into monasteries and manuscripts, into revolutions in classrooms, into conversations spoken too quietly to be recorded. Each time it arrived, it changed, as all living things must. This was never purity, it was survival. Athens as a place faded into history. Athens as a question did not. Beneath the silence of ruined columns, the question remained unfinished, not resolved, not perfected, only carried forward, unevenly, sometimes clumsily, sometimes beautifully. Democracy did not endure because it was flawless. It endured because it was unfinished. Stone remembers weight. Breath remembers motion. Ideas remember neither perfectly, but they remember enough. The echo did not demand return. It did not insist on imitation. It allowed itself to be misunderstood, because misunderstanding meant being heard at all. It learned to travel light, shedding certainty, carrying only inquiry. As night deepens over the ruins, stars shift slowly overhead. The sky that once watched assemblies now watches absence. Yet the silence here is not empty. It is full of pauses waiting to be filled again. Perhaps it was never meant to arrive complete. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And so the chapter does not close with an ending, but with a resting place. The ruins remain, the stars remain, the question remains, breathing quietly in the dark, waiting for the next voice to lean close enough to hear it. And so, in the candlelit heart of Athens, a new idea took root. Not perfect, not complete, not for everyone, but alive. A belief that power could be argued, voted, shared, and questioned. That laws could be written by people and reshaped by people. And though centuries would pass, through wars, empires, and revolutions, that small experiment in a bustling Greek city would continue to ripple outward like circles on quiet water. Now, there's nothing left to solve tonight. No need to hold on to names or dates. Just the feeling of the story, the calm of distant footsteps fading into time. If you enjoyed this sleeping history tale, you can let it lull you again another night, because history is patient and it will wait for you. Thank you for spending your evening with Twilight Tale. May your thoughts grow lighter, your breathing slower, and your sleep deep and easy. Good night.